Hi, so this isn't really going to constitute a film review, rather a saga review, so to speak. And the saga I'm going to be reviewing, or rather looking back on, um, is Twilight. I've got all five films, just put them inside there. Twilight Saga. Now, I'm going to say from the outset, I'm a fan of Twilight, and I don't really care what people think of that. I like Twilight. There it is. I put my cards on the table. I like it. But I appreciate that it's somewhat polarizing. So I want to kind of address why I think people are so mixed on it, so to speak. Now, I should stress that I'm solely talking about the films here. I haven't read the books by Stephanie Meyer, which of course go into a lot more detail. I don't think that you can ever, there'll never be a film that is adapted exactly the way the book is. You'll never be able to have the nuances and the details that a book does. But both have been very successful. Both the best-selling books and the films were all commercially successful. Cumulatively, they grossed well over 1 billion. So that's pretty successful. From Twilight in 2008 to Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2 in 2012. So they sort of straddled the end of the 2000s and the beginning of the 2010s. Um, if you don't know the Twilight series, basically it's about a young woman, teenage girl, Bella Swan, who goes to live with her father in Washington State from Arizona. And to cut a long story short, she falls in love with a vampire. And there's sort of a love triangle developed between a werewolf who was a childhood friend, Jacob Black. Um, and the series is well known, so I don't really need to go through the synopsis. But that's what it's about if you're not familiar with it. Now, you might say, why would a 35-year-old straight man defend Twilight? And I admit it's kind of become a bit of a running joke that I think Twilight's associated with teenage girls or um, that sort of trope. And to an extent, that's true. But I suspect that Twilight is one of those things that many people won't admit to actually liking. I honestly think a lot of the people that rain on Twilight actually quite like it. And I would say if the critics really hate it so much, they seem to spend an awful lot of time rubbishing it. They seem to spend an awful lot of time going back to it. So, a common one is being still a better love story than Twilight. Um, Certainly there are some cliches. I can see that. There are some tropes about the whole love triangle thing that's kind of been done before. Um, Robert Pattinson, who plays the character Edward Cullen, who along with Bella Swan and Jacob Black is the main character, is quite a big actor, of course. He first got recognition in the Harry Potter series, and he's become a pretty established actor in his own right. Probably the biggest name out of all the cast. Um, but here's the thing: I think you need to look at Twilight beyond just the three main characters, because if you just look at those three, then it does get fairly dull after a while, and it does get quite cliched. But if you actually start to look into the background to it, I think it's more creative than it's given credit for. I mean, I don't think there's anything that can be quite compared to it. Maybe there's other things. I haven't seen the Vampire Diaries. I don't know if there's similar tropes with that, but um, it's totally unique. And here's the thing: people. Well, I think one of the main attack points is that Stephanie Meyer took the whole vampire genre into something else. So these vampires don't live in coffins in old medieval European castles. They are outwardly looking modern in many ways. The baseball scene in the first film, I loved that. I thought it was very creative. Um, and I think that there's this idea that because she was going against the notion of what vampires should be, that somehow is a flaw. I actually think that is a strength because it gives an originality. Okay, you may think the idea of vampires sparkling in the sun is ridiculous, and maybe it is, but it is original. Um, there's a lot of aspects around how the characters are compiled, I think is quite interesting. And I would say actually there's a channel called the Amagi with an A that's been doing the background to a lot of the characters. I think it's a very good introduction if, like me, you haven't read the novels and you want to know a bit more background. Um, because each of the films follows a different trait of the story. It's mostly focused on the vampires, but a big chunk of it, well over a third, is also on the werewolf side of things, and that's based around the Quillette Native American community. And I have to say, from my impression, Stephanie Meyer handled that with sensitivity. There was Native American actors played the roles, and um, it certainly, I know, it regenerated interest in Quillette culture in that part of North America. But the whole juxtaposition of the two sides is very interesting, I find. There's aspects, for example, the Cullen family, Edward family, the fact that they're vegetarians, they only drink animal blood. But each one of them, if you look at the backstories, it's actually very interesting, creative. Carlisle Cullen coming from Jacobean England, well, from the period of the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. Um, Edward himself being a victim of the 1918 pandemic. If you look at the background, particularly the Volturi, and even the werewolf legends around the blacks and the werewolf pack, um, it's actually very creative. So those who say that it's not, I think that's unfair. And I think that's why it's compelling because actually, if it was just about Bella, Edward, and Jacob, I would get bored very quickly. But it really isn't. I think there's a lot of intrigue around the other characters, and okay, they are secondary characters, but there is something about Twilight that was undeniably captivating. And I think it's one of those things where people like to bash it because it was successful, it was popular. I know Stephen King was very critical in his words. Stephanie Meyer can't write worth a darn, and he was comparing her unfavorably to J.K. Rowling. Now, maybe J.K. Rowling is a superior writer. Maybe she overall has more talent, but I think that some of the critique of Twilight is unfair. And, if these people that come to Twilight videos and say it's rubbish, my question is, why do you go to the videos? I personally think that some people don't want to admit that they actually rather like it. They might think some of the story is daft. There's obvious plot holes, I should say, particularly in the films. There are things that don't make a great deal of sense. One of the obvious ones is if the Cullen family, you know, ostensibly, if they're in the community for a long time, why do people not notice that they're aging? There are some plot holes and obvious flaws, but I just think that, in a sense, Twilight's a victim of its own success. I mean, this is a series that has produced a lot of offshoots and it even produced parodies. In 2010, the film Vampire Suck. Now, if something is well known and successful enough to be parodied, I would say that's a mark of success. So I appreciate it's not everyone's cup of tea, but if you think it's just a teenage love triangle, I would ask you to just give it a chance. There is more to it. And I particularly like that channel, Liam Maggie. I love the background music that that guy uses. I think it's well put together. Um, of the five films, I don't really have a favorite, but it's a good finale. And I would say all of the vampires, by the way, within the Cullen family, they all have their own special power, so to speak. Um, and they all have interesting backstories. So I really think and they're memorable characters. That's the thing. I mean, 10 years on, people still talk in fan circles about Carlisle Cullen and Alice Cullen, and there's a whole spin off to it where you get fan fiction and so on. So people can diss Twilight, but honestly, I think 20, 30 years from now, people will appreciate that there was more to it than it simply being dismissed as a cliched teenage love triangle. There are cliches there. There are certain tropes that can be seen in other areas. But what the hell? I like it. I love the baseball scene. I like the characters. Who's my favorite character? I do like Carlisle Cullen. Um, Michael Sheen plays Arrow, who's sort of the leader, so to speak, of the Volturi, played by the British actor Michael Sheen, who also played David Frost and Tony Blair. Great actor. Um, but seriously, if you haven't seen Twilight and you assume it's just cliched love triangle between three annoying teenagers, check it out. Check it out because some of the background stuff actually is pretty creative. And one thing Twilight can't be accused of is just, ripping off Bram Stoker's Dracula or something like that. Honestly, if it had done that, it would be very easy to make a film in the sort of vein of that whole Gothic European thing, castles and coffins and so on. But it's been done before. 1992's Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was very good production, very creepy. Interview with a Vampire, great movie. They are what they are, and you could argue they're superior to Twilight. Maybe they are, but the point is, Twilight can't be accused of just copying them. Twilight is original. Whatever you think of it, the certain aspects around the characterizations are definitely unique, and that's what I like about it. So that's my honest, candid reflection on Twilight. And I know I open myself up to ridicule. What other 35-year-old straight guy would admit to liking Twilight? But what the hell? I do. I like Twilight. Let me know your thoughts if you are a Twilight fan. And if you're not, I would simply ask not to agree with me, but just give it a chance. Because it's really not as bad as it's made out to be.